Hit OK on the thing, Colin. Scroll over to the next page.
To the next
Look on the
page.
screen in front of you.
I'm looking at the screen in front of me.
No, above you.
Above me. Do I have
Hit
to go
OK on
left or
that.
right? There we go. Hit OK.
Yes.
I'm hitting OK.
And then go back to the other thing.
And then I'm
with
going
cursor
back to the
and
other
so that it's activated. Lovely.
Simply lovely. We start at 7:01. What will they think?
Whatever will they say?
I need to not do that. I need to not hit this.
All right. Okay. Let me get the timer started here. All right, everyone. Welcome to the June presentation for Rise and Progress. This is Gas, Glass, and Iron Cars in the Michigan Capitol. My name is Colin.
Hi, I'm Shayla.
I'm Jacob.
And we're here to talk to you about all things cars and our Capitol building. Now, to kind of get started off here, I think I owe a little bit of an explanation for our title because there was a little bit of confusion when we were doing everything on the inside. So we wanted to have a little alliteration between things that are found within your automobile and then within our Capitol building. So gas, our Capitol building used to be gas powered, gas that goes in your gas tank, glass in our glass floor, glass in your windows and your sunroofs, and of course iron block engine, and all of the wonderful iron that's in our building as well. So with that out of the way, let's get right into things. So we begin our presentation today talking about the rise of the auto industry in Lansing itself. Now, kind of starting off with kind of the pre-car life within Lansing, talking about all that. Lansing during the turn of the century was relatively young and growing city. The capital city had only been seated within kind of the last few decades. And the Capitol building itself was only in its first few years of actual service. As you can see here, the look from Michigan Ave towards the Capitol was fit for the main transportation of the day. It was for horse and wagons, things like that. And Lansing itself, as a city, kind of stuck close to the Grand and the Red Cedar rivers, as this would be vital for systems like water for boilers being pumped in from the rivers to kind of run all of that industry that we'd start to see. Due to these factors, the allure of working or producing in and around the Capitol, both A and O, was strong. Now, as for industry leading up to the car, leading up to the rise of the automobile itself, industry in Lansing was starting to ramp up, and much of that industry in the city would provide to be transitional into the growth of the auto industry. Many manufacturers for wagon parts as well as larger sized engines would lay the groundwork for automotive production. Companies such as Clark & Co. Carriages, Lansing Wagon Works, and Lansing Iron and Engine Works were a few of these major players early on. This early industry is well displayed in our own capital as well. Michigan would eventually become known to produce cars. Our Muse, as you can see behind me over on your this side over here, in our inner dome predates that car culture, but still shows off that industry that we would come to see and know. Now, as for the rise of cars in Lansing, while there are many names around the early years of cars before the emergence of the main big three, there are two well-known names in Lansing that we must talk about that are very notable, which is William C. Durant as well as R.E. Olds. Now, starting off with Durant himself, Billy Durant, whose kind of lasting legacy in the auto industry would end up being kind of larger and longer than Olds, but Olds spent more time in Lansing, so we're also going to talk about him a whole bunch as well. So he got his start with Buick and quickly grew, outperforming Ford, Cadillac, and even Oldsmobile in the company's early years. He would grow more with the formation of General Motors, which would end up being his downfall, with an overextension of funds that would force him out of the company kind of as a whole. It is kind of to note as well with his formation of General Motors that in his first time kind of running GM, he would actually buy Oldsmobile from the Smith family, which kind of ended up saving Oldsmobile as a brand and as a legacy, all that sorts of things as well. Later on in 1921, Durant would enter back into the auto industry with the formation of Durant Motors here in Lansing, Michigan itself. They had a large range of models, with the Star model being aimed towards that kind of Model T buyer crowd. However, this was not to last, as with the Great Depression hitting in the late 1920s, the company would also go under in 1933. As for more of a direct tie to the Capitol itself, Durant actually bought the land for his factory from Governor Osborne, which is part of the Governor's Dairy Farm out in the west side of Lansing. Now, for the godfather of Lansing Automotive himself, R.E. Olds. Can't skip him here. So he started the Olds Motor Vehicle Company in Lansing in August of 1897. This original iteration was bought in 1899, renamed to the Olds Motor Works, and was subsequently moved down to Detroit in hopes of kind of finding better success down there in the larger of the two cities. After this move, though, disaster struck as a fire in the factory, the kind of Detroit factory, burned down, prompting kind of a swift return and retreat back to Lansing itself. Success was found, as Old Motor Works was the top-selling auto manufacturer from 1903 to 1904, and a major contributor to this was the Curve Dash Runabout, becoming very successful and was the first commercially successful car mass-produced on a progressive assembly line in the United States. However, this was not to last, as kind of a dispute between the stakeholders, kind of the shareholders. Olds left the company to pursue different ventures. Olds lost control of the Motorworks on January 1st of 1904. The Smith family, a majority stockholders of Olds Motorworks, wanted to build big, expensive cars. Olds wanted to build like what Henry Ford eventually did, which was going to be smaller, more affordable cars. The Smiths had to actually buy all of Olds stock, which made him very rich, and he had REO up and running in just a few years by 1905. In the end, REO sold many more cars, while the Smith family also almost drove Oldsmobile to bankruptcy until it was obviously bought up by GM. Now, both Olds and REO increased in popularity with various different public display events, such as cross-country journeys, displays with public figures, or most famously to Lansing, the climb on the Capitol steps. Now, starting off with cross-country tours. And Olds was actually one of the first vehicles to make the trip cross-country. Well, it ended up kind of in third place behind a Winton and a Packard. It was actually the lightest of the bunch and was hailed to be the most reliable of the three, making for a bunch of really great advertising for the vehicle itself. The duo seen here behind me is going to be Lester Whitman and Eugene Hammond, who are the people who made that first trip, obviously riding in their Curve Dash right there. Next, to talk about some important figures, we have to talk about the President's Drive from the Capitol to MAC. In 1907, during the semi-centennial of MAC, the President, Teddy Roosevelt, attended to speak for this 50th anniversary celebration. He was able to make it from the Capitol to MAC in style. You can see R.E. Olds actually behind the wheel here. Next to him in shotgun was Roosevelt's secretary, William Loeb. And then left to right in the back is going to be President Roosevelt himself, and then MAC President Jonathan L. Snyder. At the time, Oldsmobile and REO were both very prevalent within Lansing, and both wanted to have Roosevelt kind of be seen within the car itself. So there was a compromise made between the two. Roosevelt was driven from the train station to the Capitol in an Oldsmobile, and on the return trip, as pictured, was seen in an REO. Now, as for the step climb, we cannot skip over the step climb here. Now, the first Capitol step climb was completed in 1903. It was done by Olds Motor Works as a display of the Curve Dash's agility and climbing capability. The driver of the first attempt was Edwin Doan, who, as described by Lansing auto historian Dennis Castile, was a stunt driver for Olds back in the day. With some slight modifications to the rear tires, the Curve Dash was able to make it up to the top step. This feat would be attempted 3 more times, starting in 1982 with Joe Morelli piloting. He was unable to make it to the first landing. He would then make another attempt in 1987, this time modifying the back tires in the same manner as the original 1903 attempt, and was able to successfully make it to at least the first landing. Another attempt would eventually be made again in 2007 by Jim Walkinshaw. Now, to talk more about the impact of REO itself. So, REO Olds restarting in Lansing in 1905 with a quick turnabout from the Olds Motor Works to establish the actual REO Motor Car Company. Due to legal actions with obviously the previous company, he was unable to kind of choose his original name for the company, which is going to be the R.E. Olds Motor Car Company. The big citation was confusion by customers. Basically, in losing rights to his name, he chose the abbreviation REO for his new company. With R.E. Olds establishing this new company, was able to kind of create a boom in job possibility and added into the industry of the Lansing landscape. From this point on, it became the case that it was pretty much if you were in Lansing and you didn't work for the government, you were working within the auto industry, to some capability at least. Some of his most popular models came from this new stint in Lansing, like models like the Runabout and also the REO Speedwagon, of course. His impact and wealth would be felt through the years in Lansing with additions to the community and city, with a few notable examples being Rio Town, the Olds Hotel, MAC School of Engineering, and Olds Tower. Now, starting off with Rio Town, the town named itself after Ransom E. Olds, as much of the production and industry for the company would fall in the southwest region of Lansing, and the town basically practically grew out of the factory itself. For the Olds Tower, now known as the Bogie Tower, formerly named the Capital Bank Tower, but known to many obviously as the Olds Tower, it was a statement piece for Olds and stands as an everlasting landmark in the capital city itself. Due to his wealth and status, Olds was able to basically just bypass building ordinance requiring buildings in Lansing to be smaller than the nearby Capitol building, allowing for him to create the tallest building in Lansing itself. For a couple other landmarks, we also have the Hotel Olds. First opened in 1926, the Olds Hotel was funded by the Lansing Community Hotel Corporation. However, one of its main benefactors and funding sources for this was none other than R.E. Olds himself. With this large contribution to the hotel, they just named it after him. We know that building today now as the George Romney Building, the home of the executive branch offices for the state of Michigan. As for the MAC School of Engineering, it's got some ties to Olds himself once again. In 1916, the original School of Engineering building for MAC burned down. MAC approached the state legislator asking for financial assistance to rebuild this building and kind of get the engineering department back on its feet. While MAC was known for its agriculture, engineering was a big draw for students and getting people in, and they were worried that this would kind of drop things down a little bit. The legislator kind of debated this request, and fortunately for them, then MAC President Frank I'm going to butcher this, Ketz. You got it on this?
Say it again.
Kedzie.
Kedzie.
You guys got it. Was good friends with R.E. Olds. He wrote to Olds and asked him out to help out financially. Olds responded with an then unheard of donation of $100,000. Today, that's around $3 million. The Michigan legislature was then basically just off the hook for having to deal with this. Other things were going on, like the World War I, and all that stuff going on. And as a result of R.E.'s generosity, MSU is today one of the great, if not the greatest university in Michigan, of course. Now, for last few notes about some important things as well. Most controversial thing today. The Capitol parking lot. We have to talk about parking because cars have to park somewhere. The Capitol parking lot was established in the 1920s. It started off as basically just little drives up to the Capitol, which steadily grew over time. This expanded until it basically engulfed the entire west side of the Capitol complex. And this parking lot was closed down unceremoniously with the geothermal project and obviously the building of this wonderful Heritage Hall in the late 2010s. In addition to all of this, when the parking lot was starting to grow, there was kind of a push for changing the road system around our Capitol a little bit as well. We had all these two-way roads and there was a lot of traffic coming in and out from our Capitol building, so we wanted to change that as well. So in addition with this expanding parking lot, the layout of the roads surrounding the Capitol changes a bit, where roads are shifted to one way to attempt to control all this traffic and stuff. And one last thing to talk about, we have to talk a little bit about Lansing PD and its relationship to Olds as well. Lansing Police were one of the first police departments in the nation to have an automotive-based patrol with this beast named the Black Maria. It was an Olds touring car with added light gauge wire on the back to deter any escapes off the back of it. In its first couple years of service, this car assisted in 722 arrests and attended 114 fires and 233 accidents. Now, speaking of all these roads and all the stuff like that and laws and having to follow laws, I'll hand it off to Shayla to talk more in depth about roads, highways, and laws.
Okay. All right. So by the late 1800s, Lansing citizens were getting sick of muddy roads, and so they started to pave several main streets with brick. One of our well-known Capitol characters, which is Richard Gleister, deserves a mention here. So he was the head stonemason during the building's construction in the 1870s. He also was involved with several other community-related things, and that includes helping to pave local streets. So we do have newspaper reports, which you can see out there, about these, this work that he did. So in 1882, he paved Washington Avenue from Kalamazoo Street to the bridge, and then in 1886, he paved the intersection of Michigan and Capitol Avenue. Now, it is also important to note that during the building's construction, there were heavy materials like the stone used in the building that was being hauled from afar to the site. And so this had to cross over the Michigan Avenue Bridge, which was really the first time that the bridge had been tested in this way. The weight and weathering over time really started to wear down the wooden planks, and after a little bit, they were starting to have to be replaced almost yearly. And so Lansing Mayor John Robson was able to, pretty early on in the building's construction, secure funds for a new iron bridge to fix that problem. Another big person to mention is Horatio Earl. So Earl is often referred to as the father of good roads. He was born in Vermont in 1855, but he moved to Detroit in 1889. And he was a businessman. A lot of his business is really related to roads. So he had the Earl Cycle Company, the Genesee Gravel Company, the Good Roads Supply Company, and Earl Equipment Company. Essentially, he was a bicycle enthusiast and was involved with the League of American Wheelmen, the LAW, and actually rose up into leadership there. And bicyclists also need good roads, so he was a big proponent of getting better roads. In 1900, he was elected to the Michigan Senate, and he started trying to develop a system of roads that would be able to connect major cities to each other and the state capital. He then went on to found in 1902 the American Roadmakers Association. Now, an early on event that had to do with these kind of good road improvements was trying to change some roads from brick to macadam roads. So macadam is basically a bunch of broken stones that are then compacted by heavy rollers. And so it's not quite as durable and resistant as concrete ends up being, but it's smoother than brick. It doesn't like move around quite as much, so it's a little bit better option. From 1905 to 06, there was this effort made to create a macadam road from Lansing to the Agricultural College, which would become MSU. And this was meant to serve as kind of an example of like a good road that people would be inspired by. So it was challenging to get funds for this road. The 1850 Michigan Constitution actually didn't allow the state to help fund road building. And so instead, the college donated some money to fund it. The federal government assisted in the project. They provided engineers and some of the necessary machinery. And then funds were actually raised by community members as well. So a lot of these people were either people that lived on the road or near the road that would be directly affected by it. So you can see these newspaper articles. There's a lot of them that have to do with, we want to raise money, we're trying to build the road, now we don't have enough money, like back and forth, trying to get people to donate more so that the road can be built. And it does end up happening. So this is before and after photos of the road. You can see it is greatly improved once this macadam road is, constructed. So in 1905, Earl and Governor Fred Warner start to promote an amendment to the 1850 state constitution, and this will let the state invest money into public road projects. Some of the momentum from the macadam road helps people to be kind of excited about this and wanting to pass it, so it does pass. It's adopted in April, and then a bill is also passed to create the State Highway Department, which will be overseen by an appointed state highway commissioner. This is basically the beginnings of MDOT, just very early on. Horatio Earl will serve as the first state highway commissioner, and that's 1905 to 09. And at this point, it's an appointed position. Later on, it does become an elected position. So Frank F. Rogers is then the first elected state highway commissioner, and that is 1913. He serves till 1929. So he actually had served as deputy commissioner under Earl while Earl was serving. So he kind of has this idea of where Earl wants to go with things, what he's trying to do with the roads, and he's able to keep that going. So another bill is also passed in April of 1905, and that requires vehicle registration. So this will assign a unique number for every automobile owner. For the first 5 years, drivers have to actually furnish their own license plates. It's not until 1910 that the state actually begins issuing plates. And then driver's licenses themselves come about later. So the first ones are issued in 1919. And we do have newspaper reports that tell us who some of the earliest license receivers are, which is kind of fun. So the very first license goes to the governor at the time, Albert Sleeper. It's actually checked by Frank Fitzgerald, who will then also become a governor later on. The second license is issued to Coleman Vaughan, who is Secretary of State at the time. We know that Frank Fitzgerald got number 8, and then he ends up losing it and has to apply for a duplicate license later on in 1923. So I think that's kind of a fun little addition to the story. And Loren Dickinson is also one of the earliest. He's number 11, and he was lieutenant governor at the time. So at this point, licenses cost just 50 cents, and they're good for as long as the operator lives. An amendment in 1921 requires that any motor vehicles that are titled are also registered with the Secretary of State. This actually comes out of the need to track vehicles because after World War I, there's a lot of issues with car theft. So I thought that was interesting. And then in 1931, another amendment makes it so that licenses will then expire. So the Secretary of State is really overseeing all of the issuing and, registering of vehicles and licenses and all these things. They are operating out of the Capitol. So they at first occupy the west side of the first floor north wing. They at that point use as many as 7 rooms. So that includes a washroom and a cloakroom. And then as cars are becoming more popular, they start to get more responsibility. And so they're growing not just in what they're doing, but also physically expanding as well. So they end up expanding throughout the Capitol. They end up on the ground floor, first floor, and fourth floors, kind of spread out all around. The photo here is from 1938. So this is people lined up in the ground floor hallway, and they're waiting to get license plates from the Secretary of State. So there was a big, at that point, March 1st deadline, and a lot of people were trying to get their plates a little bit late. So there was a big rush. By a 1941 survey, this is the Secretary of State is the biggest tenant in the Capitol, and they've got 341 workers at that point. All right, so as the car is becoming bigger and more popular, of course, there is still more of a demand for better roads. Governor Sleeper starts to really try to push to find funding for road improvement so that more can be done. It is Governor Grosbeck, who's his successor, that really becomes recognized for his efforts towards road building, as well as some tax laws he passes to provide funding for the projects. So before we have a well-organized system for developing roads and construction in general, it's really the townships that oversee the development of roads. It's basically like you go out and you just fix whatever's going on in front of your property so that people can get around, which isn't maybe like the best way to do it. It's not overseen by just one entity at that point. So in general, paved roads are pretty limited. In 1916, the federal government passes the first Road Act. So this allows for federal aid to states on a matching basis. And then that's followed up by the Townsend Bill in 1919. So this is actually named after Charles Townsend, who is one of Michigan's U.S. senators. And this appropriates money for states to construct roads. They do just have to follow certain specifications, and it's under federal supervision. So this is really establishing a federal and state road building partnership. And so that same year, 1919, in Michigan, a state bond program is initiated, and that's meant to go towards construction. So it's $50 million over 5 years. It'll also establish a highway loan board. So that consists of the governor, treasurer, attorney general, secretary of state, and highway commissioner. And that's all done under Governor Sleeper with Grosbeck as attorney general. When Grosbeck becomes governor, a little bit later, 1921, an administrative board is created, and they're basically overseeing all the activities of state departments and agencies, and so that will replace the Highway Loan Board. So essentially, all of that means that Grosbeck has almost complete control over the highways and what happens with them at that point. Oops, sorry. So Grosbeck will be the one that oversees really the major shift from gravel and macadam roads to concrete. Of course, concrete is going to be stronger, it's going to hold up longer, and it doesn't have to be fixed quite as often, so they're able to put more roads in. He really does have this big vision, and he launches this kind of big road building campaign in Michigan. So during his time in office, he will oversee the addition of over 3,000 miles of new highway, and he'll also improve almost all of the pre-existing miles of highway, all but 50 miles, and there's over 4,700 at that point. Of all these miles, over 1,000 of them are in concrete, so it's pretty good. He also oversees 244 bridges being built. And so, of course, the issue of how we're going to pay for all of these roads comes up pretty quickly because that bond program is only for 5 years. And so they need plans for what they're going to do when the money runs out. So under Grosbeck, decisions are made to acquire the funds basically in 2 ways. So one is a gas tax, which will be set at 2 cents. The other one is changing the ways that vehicles are taxed, basically making them more fairly distributed. Jacob is going to expand on that later, so I won't go too much into detail for now. But with the new sources of funding, Grosbeck is then able to keep leading us through highway development. He'll also oversee the acquisition of a state cement plant in Chelsea. So this helps the state start bidding on road building contracts. And actually, they end up underbidding a lot of private companies, and they're using paid prison labor to do the work. So it's very efficient, but it also starts to anger private companies because they're being underbid. So that does cause a little bit of drama over time. And then another big project that happens under Grosbeck is the widening of Woodward Avenue. So this really has a big challenge associated with it, which is moving some of the Grand Trunk Railroad line. And he's able to figure it out. 1925-26, that is widened. So that's a big success for him. So Michigan at this point is becoming a leader in road building, but in general, just in the automotive industry as well. We do have a lot of other firsts. A lot of these are going to be Wayne County specific, just because Detroit was big and a lot of the big automotive names were operating out of Detroit. But just a couple of the firsts that came out of Michigan. We did have the first mile of rural concrete highway in the country, and that was Woodward Avenue, 6 Mile to 7 Mile in 1901. We had the first use of a stop sign. You can see a picture up there in 1915 in Detroit. The first use of scrapers on trucks to remove snow, which is very practical, also 1915. We had the first planting of trees to beautify our highways in 1918, the first painting of center lines on highways in 1920, and the first use of a 3-color traffic light. And that's the same year at Woodward Avenue and Fort Street in Detroit. So once we get to the 1940s, then we're at war. Michigan's automobile assembly lines start to be used for the war efforts. And so the highway department builds the state's first 4-lane divided expressway. And it takes about 11 months to do so. It's in 1942, and that'll go from Detroit to Ypsilanti, really helping people and machines and things to get to the Ford Motors bomber plant. And as things keep kind of advancing and everything, they decide that there are more regulations that are needed just to keep things safe. In 1949, we have Act 300, which is a codified framework for all kinds of car-related things that comes up. So vehicle registration, titling, sale, transfer, regulation of highways, licensing of drivers and dealers, taxing vehicles, and financial responsibility related to accidents. And so this is going to not only make the roads safer and also more regulated, but the vehicles as well. So kind of continuing with our story of highway development, in 1956, there's congressional approval of a national interstate freeway system, and this starts to trigger a lot of highway building programs, kind of all kinds of states doing it. So in Michigan, John C. Mackey runs for state highway commissioner, and he'll start his 4-year term in 1957. He is notably the last elected commissioner. The 1963 Michigan Constitution will kind of reorganize the department, and then it will require a 6-member commission appointed by the governor to select a leader. So this will be the Michigan State Highway Commission, which is then advising the Michigan Department of State Highways. Later on, that becomes the Michigan State Transportation Commission, and they're advising MDOT, and that name change comes in 1979. So that's kind of how we know them today. As Highway Commissioner, Mackey helps to really expand the interstate highway system. So it's under his leadership that I-94 is developed, becoming the first cross-state interstate highway in the nation. And then he is elected for a 2nd term in 1960. He will also go on to become president of the American Association of State Highway Officials. And we do have a welcome center in his honor today. So that's that highway rest stop in Clare, Michigan. So some of you may have been there. Kind of getting into the latter half of the 20th century, MDOT will start to turn its attention more towards environmental protections and safety and comfort. So promoting things like paving bicycle paths, van pool programs, the Adopt a Highway program, and then safety precautions and like more signage and construction zones as well. So just a couple laws that we can talk about briefly. The legislature is really trying to kind of pass things that will also regulate roads and cars and make things safer. So starting out with drunk driving laws, these are actually some of the earliest laws that come about. So a lot of states will start to add drunk driving laws in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, but Michigan's will come in 1917, and they're really not super well enforced at that point. We're one of the first couple of states to actually genuinely start enforcing this, and that's not until the 1960s or so. At that point, there's a law passed that creates a two-tier system. So it begins at 0.05 VAC and goes up to 0.15. That will then change in 1971 to 0.08 and 0.10. This actually just gets revised, multiple times after that. So in 1982 and then again in 1991. And basically the whole point is just to stiffen penalties for drunk driving and kind of close loopholes along the way. And in 2010, which is more recent, we did have the addition of the super drunk law, which is even stiffer punishment if you have a BAC over 0.17. Speed limits actually come after that, so that's what pretty much all of these pictures are related to. Early on, we've got different speeds for day and night. So for example, in 1956, you could go 65 miles per hour by day, but only 55 by night. In 1974, that drops, so it's for both day and night, 55 miles per hour. It's actually a federal response to the energy crisis happening at the time, and so the federal government threatens to restrict funds if you're not complying with this. And I think there's a couple of pictures up there. We were kind of late to complying with it, but we did comply. So there was a lot of like sassy articles written about why are we not complying type thing. And then in 1987, these requirements loosen again, and highway speeds will go up to 65, and they'll go up again to 70 in 1996. And actually, more recently, now we've got 75 in some spots as well. Another big issue that comes up is passenger safety, and that's for both adults and children. So there's two big laws that are added in 1985. One is related to car seats, so those weren't required by law until 1985, but they did exist earlier than that, which I thought was interesting. So I have a couple early ones up there. They existed as early as like the late 1920s, early 1930s, but they weren't really used until the 1960s, and then they were still pretty rare in the 1960s as well. But if you're looking at the screen, the one on the left is from the 30s, middle one is 60s, right one is 70s, and then the one that actually has a kid in it is also 70s. I believe it's 73. And I think it's very cute. So this is something that Debbie Stabenow, who is then a state representative, was really a key part in making happen. And a big part of her drive to want to pass the law is that she was the first sitting legislator to give birth. And so you'll see her up there with her daughter. And then along with Stabenow, we also have Senator Cederberg that worked really heavily on getting that car seat law passed. Another major supporter of passenger safety was Richard H. Austin. So that was our longest serving Secretary of State. He actually got the nickname of Mr. Traffic Safety because of all the efforts he put into this. So probably his best known achievement was pushing for the mandatory seatbelt law. And that was like 14 years of campaigning that it took him to actually get that passed. You can see Austin Blair up there with the seatbelt on, the statue out front. That does pass in the same year, 1985. And he did a lot of things related to car safety. So he also wanted to improve, driver improvement programs if you're younger or if you're labeled like a problem driver. He wanted to increase penalties for drinking and driving, and then he wanted more laws around wearing motorcycle helmets. And we do actually have a building named after him today, the Austin Building. Right next door to the Austin Building is the Van Wagner Building, and that is actually named after a governor that also had ties to the automotive industry. So I'm going to hand it over to Jacob, and he's going to tell you about governors related to the automotive industry.
All right. Thank you. All right. So picking up where Shayla left off, next door to the Austin Building, right out back here is the Van Wagner Building. And Governor Murray Van Wagner, his friends called him Pat. So Governor Van Wagner is one of our governors that has a really sort of unique background compared to most others. He was a civil engineer. He had a civil engineering degree from the University of Michigan. He worked professionally in engineering, designing bridges for the highway department. He eventually opens his own private firm, but he was in this engineering, this road and highway development field before he entered politics. He ends up going into politics. In 1933, he's elected highway commissioner. He serves there through 1940. And he is the only highway commissioner to go on to become governor, which is the tie to the building out back, which I'll talk about in a second. He is responsible largely for the expansion of our highway system throughout the 1930s, which a lot of people are through the decades. Under his watch, and you'll see pictured in the center there, he develops the first travel information center in the country, which is basically a large rest stop, information center. That's in New Buffalo, Michigan, and it's in 1935 when he develops that as highway commissioner. During his watch, Between his watch as highway commissioner and governor, the causeway is built into the Straits of Mackinac in preparation for the construction of a bridge at the Straits of Mackinac. Lots of governors, lots of people in power campaigned and tried to get a bridge built. And Governor Van Wagner's no exception. He does not get it built, but he gets the first step, the causeway built, while he's governor in the early 1940s. Subsequently, he is appointed and is a member and a vice chair of the Mackinac Bridge Authority from 1950 until his death in 1986. So he's one of the more long-serving members of that authority. He was governor during World War II, and this is when Michigan's auto plants turned into the arsenal of democracy, so he works heavily on that as well, passes that baton off to Governor Kelly after him as well. He becomes president of the American Road Builders Association. One of my favorite things to point out on a Capitol tour is that in his portrait, he's painted holding a state highway map. That's a nod to his career as the highway commissioner and being involved in that field. And then lastly there, the Van Wagner building, which is pictured on the screen, and you can see it when you leave tonight, was dedicated in 1999 to him. It was built as the transportation building, and as the one transportation commissioner, the highway commissioner becomes governor, he gets the building dedicated to him. Next up, these are not in chronological order, by the way, so you'll bear with me. There's a logic behind it, I promise you. Another governor, the governor, I should say, who finally does get the Mackinac Bridge built, based on some of Governor Van Wagner's workings, is Governor Williams, Soapy Williams, in the 1950s. Before I talk about the bridge and his other things, the photo you're seeing on the screen is from 1948. This is when he's first campaigning for office. He's elected and becomes governor in 1949. He and Nancy, his wife, campaigned statewide in a 1948 DeSoto. So he's one of those governors. He's not the first to campaign statewide in an automobile, but he's one of those that really makes it a point to do that. Now, Governor Williams gets the Mackinac Bridge built. It opens in 1957. There's a funny, famous story of the fact that he had intended to be the first person to drive across the bridge, but his license was either expired or left behind, so he could not be the first person, and First Lady Nancy Williams is instead the first person to drive across the Mackinac Bridge with her husband in tow. So that's a fun connection there, and I do want to point out this photo. Has some of the faces we've been already talking about tonight in it. This is from the dedication of the Mackinac Bridge. And we'll circle some faces. Here's John C. Mackey, the highway commissioner at the time, that Shayla told you about. We have Governor Williams. He's recognizable with his bow tie on. Here is Governor Van Wagner, who I told you about. He was odd in years at this point. He lives quite a lengthy post-gubernatorial life, including that stint as on the Bridge Authority, and he is there for its dedication. The other person I want to talk about briefly is between the governors there in the middle, holding the hat. That is Prentice Brown. And Prentice Brown is really sort of Mr. Mackinac Bridge, if you will. So he had been a native of St. Ignace. He was a U.S. Senator from Michigan and the longtime president of the Bridge Authority from 1951 until 1973. So I wanted to mention him as well. I think you're going to hear a whole bunch more about Mackinac later this year, so keep an eye out for more Rise and Progress is coming to his Heritage Hall near you. Also, I mentioned this campaigning statewide in an automobile. The first to do that was Chase Osborne, our only Yooper governor. So here he is with his lieutenant governor, whose name is not in my notes, but they are sitting in the back of the car right in front of the state capitol here in Lansing. So they saw all of our counties, the whole every square inch of our state practically. I'll also say that he is one of the governors who really promoted roads in his inaugural addresses, and he actively campaigned for that Mackinac Bridge, probably because it would have greatly benefited him to get to work and to get downstate, being a Yooper. So that's Governor Osborne. He needed to mention there. But moving along here is Governor Murphy. Governor Murphy is governor in the late 1930s. And this is maybe the one that you'd expect to hear about tonight. This is the labor movement. This is the unionization movement. So fun fact before I get into that is that Governor Murphy was endorsed by Governor Osborne for governor when he ran, because at the time President Franklin Roosevelt is in office. Roosevelt endorses a bridge at Mackinac. The Army Corps of Engineers is on board with this. They just don't get the funding. So the thought is that with Murphy in the Capitol and Roosevelt in the White House, we can finally get this bridge done. It doesn't happen. But Osborne, a Republican, endorses Murphy, a Democrat, for governor, just to be one of his successors. Now, Murphy takes office in January 1937. It is around this time, just before this, that the UAW is fledgling and coming about, and that they are hoping to strike to get some negotiation, some pull to try to get some more workers' rights. And it's in December 1936 where they're saying, hold off, hold off. Let's wait until a friendly face is in the Capitol. Let's wait till there's a friendly face in the governor's office. Murphy was seen as that friendly face that would side with this new idea, this new union movement. So that doesn't happen. They don't wait. And in December of 1936 is when the first of this sit-in strikes takes place. And this is, of course, the Flint sit-in strike that we all know about. So Murphy ends up having to be the mediator in all of this. He does send the National Guard to Flint, not to put down the strike, but to side with the workers, to protect them from any, onslaught of work from the company that they're sending police in, and there's this feud going back and forth. So he's sending the National Guard in to protect the workers. At the end of the day, by spring, the company and the UAW are not talking to each other. They can't even be in the same room as each other. So how is this negotiation? How is this going to be resolved? Well, Murphy is the mediator. He brings them to the Capitol, sets them down in the governor's office upstairs that we see every day working here at the Capitol, and he negotiates. So it's by February 1937, so it's not quite spring, it's still late winter 1937. GM finally recognizes the UAW as their exclusive bargaining representative for the company, for their employees. That original agreement was for 6 months, but it's of course renegotiated and goes on from there. This gives the UAW legitimacy because it was just a small fledgling organization with people across the state and across the country trying to get this power back to the workers. I will add that neither of the photos on screen are related to the Flint sit-down strike. The one on the left is the Michigan Power Strike negotiations, which took place in May. And the one on the right is the Chrysler strike from April of 1937. So this is when they walk out onto the front balcony and announce that a deal has been made. Also, these deals happening in February, March, April, May also has an effect on Lansing because we have the Rio sit-down strike that happens in the spring of 1937. My great-grandfather, personal touch here, was one of the organizers of that sit-down strike at Rio. And then it leads to the Lansing labor holiday and the unionization of the whole city and all the workers in Lansing. So he played a big role in that, in unionizing Michigan's workers. All right, next governor is Governor Sleeper. Governor Sleeper established the state police, and this is where we're going to talk about sort of patrolling. How do we police automobiles? How do we police cars with something that is brand new? This idea of policing. And Shayla already mentioned that he's the first to get a driver's license, so that fun fact is up there. But he creates in 1917 the Michigan State Troops Permanent Force, which is also called the Constabulary. It is a wartime force used briefly to put down strikes in the UP, and then in 1919 it's reorganized into the peacetime Michigan State Police. Roy Vandercook is the first head of the MSP, and he is placed in an office in the governor's parlor upstairs. So this is when Governor Sleeper is the first to reconfigure that space into actually offices rather than a ceremonial space as it is today and was originally. I want to mention the group of men there pictured in the center is the original 1917 troops. And two of these men in this photo have a direct connection to the Capitol. So let me tell you about them briefly. Circling here in the corner, this man's name is Harry Hiddle. Harry Hiddle was a longtime Ingham County state senator and worked upstairs in the building and was one of the original state troops. The other person pictured crouching in front, his name is Cosmo Calkins. And if you've ever been to our presentations, you'll recognize that name. Cosmo Calkins was the legislative technician in the Capitol from the 30s through the 50s. He is one of the people who puts microphones and speakers in the Senate chamber for the first time. He is the one tasked with replacing some of the ceiling, or removing, I should say, the ceiling tiles in the chamber. He does a lot of the updates and the tech part, the early tech in the building in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. So he was also an original state troop. So two important people to mention there. Let's talk about the development, though, of the state police and how they used automobiles and how they policed automobiles. So horses were discontinued in 1924, so we don't see them lasting all that long after 1919. But in 1920, there are 4 cars, 5 motorcycles, and 3 trucks. That's the fleet for the Michigan State Police. In 1929, they get their first marked patrol cars. Now, by 1967, and this is a long list, so bear with me, this is the fleet for the Michigan State Police. 386 marked cars, 62 semi-marked cars, 17 fully marked safety and traffic cars, 13 station wagons, 250 plain cars, and 20 trucks. That a total 730 vehicles in possession and control of the MSP in 1967. So that is quite an exponential growth, if you ask me. The highway patrol and traffic control and accident investigation existed from the very beginning, but it wasn't much from the start. In 1919, the MSP investigated and helped with 6 wrecks on Michigan's highways. That number in 1966 was 33,057. So that's a pretty dramatic increase again. MSP is given, along with the highway department, control of highway signs and signals and devices in 1929. So they're working hand in hand with the highway department to patrol the roads and to make sure our roads are safe. From 1931 through 1953, they are supervising license applications. So when you're applying to get a license, they are the ones signing off on it, maybe administering a test before they ship you over to the Secretary of State to actually get the license. They institute speed radar in the 1950s. It's improved in the 1960s. And then in the 50s and 60s, as this highway system is developing, they, in 1966, implement round-the-clock, 24/7 freeway patrols to make sure that all of the roads are safe. So that all started with Governor Sleeper back in 1917. Next up is Governor Groesbeck. Mr. Rhodes, if you will. So Shayla already previewed him a little bit, but Governor Groesbeck is, I learned a lot about Governor Groesbeck in doing this research. So let me tell you a little bit about the politics at play and how he ended up figuring out how to fund roads in the 1920s. So he wanted to be known and was known as the governor who got Michigan out of the mud. He had been a member of the Detroit Automobile Club, and he owned 2 cars, one personally, and then the state had provided him a Cadillac. So he had an official state car when he was governor. He served on that highway loan board that Shayla told you about as Attorney General, and then as he becomes governor, he takes over as the chair of that board. He became really actively involved in that as Attorney General, so roads became a priority for him as he becomes governor. The Highway Loan Board issues annual bonds for road construction that total $50 million over 5 years. When he became governor in 1921, he realized that that money was running out. It would run out in 1924, so he had a term and a half to figure out how to fund roads. As governor, one of his first acts, or one of his early acts, was establishing the administrative board, which in essence replaced the Highway Loan Board. It was chaired by the governor, and it made the governor the de facto head of the highway department. Now, this meant that the governor had financial and administrative control over the highway department, but not sort of the day-to-day actually building the roads control of the highway department, if you will. So it ended, to a degree, some of the partisanship and some of the corruption that was in place where they're handing out contracts to their friends who could build a road. So that sort of ended to a degree because of this administrative board that comes about. Governor Groesbeck did, though, make a point not to step on toes. He didn't insert himself in the engineering side of things, in the actual physical building of the roads. He wanted to make sure that the department was fiscally responsible and had funding, and it was going to be a reliable source of funds going forward so that they could actually maintain and develop our highways. As that money ran out in 1924, he was desperate, frankly, to find money. This was his trademark, was getting the roads done. So he wanted more money. So at this point, the roads are being paid for by a couple ways. One is taxing auto manufacturers. Groesbeck didn't think that was super fair, that the manufacturers should have to bear all that weight for building our roads. He thought that the people should have some responsibility through tax for paying for it, but he didn't think it should be a huge weight on the public through a large tax. So he proposed a gas tax, which would have allowed the public to very easily, with a little bit of contribution, help pay for the roads. So this resulted in city folks favoring a taxing of licenses over a gas tax, where the rural folks favored the gas tax. And this is something that we still hear about today. This is because proportionally, the city residents would see less benefit than the rural folks, whereas they would be paying more in the long run for the rural folks' roads. The State Tax Inquiry Commission proposed a 1 cent tax. When Groesbeck asked for recommendation, he supported that, and the legislature sent to his desk a 2 cent tax. So that was a non-starter for him immediately, and he vetoes the 2 cent tax, and then the money promptly runs out. And he says, wait a minute, well, I still need money, so how are we going to figure this out? So there's more negotiations, a new legislative term starts, and he at this point is also introducing or asking for a weight tax for vehicles. He thought that taxing vehicles by horsepower didn't make any sense because he thought that weight of vehicles was more impactful to the roads than horsepower was. So he asked for a weight tax of 70 cents and then a scale for trucks. He got his weight tax at the very end of his terms as governor, but it was not 70 cents. I think it was closer to 40 cents or somewhere around there. It's because of Groesbeck, or it's because of this that Groesbeck runs for and wins an almost unprecedented 3rd term as governor. And his final term is almost exclusively dedicated to roads. So in 1925-26, he, at the beginning of 25, he gives his State of the State, as it was not quite State of the State yet, but that's the idea is his address at the beginning of the term to the legislature. It was 15 minutes long, so it was a brief one, and it was almost entirely about roads. He made it clear to them what his priority was. He urged them to act right away to help fund highway development, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is pretty close to what he said, improved highways, trunk lines, and roads are Michigan's greatest asset, and they open up the state to more things than can ever have been accessible before, especially up north and for tourism and things like that. Now, and after that, the legislature passes a 2 cent tax again, and this time he signs it. And it's not all that long later, but now he doesn't have any money. He's desperate for money to pay for the roads, and he worked out a deal. So this is why he signs the 2 cent gas tax. He wanted a friendlier legislature. So at this time, there is redistricting happening, reapportionment happening, and he wants more friendly seats in Detroit. So in exchange for that reapportionment going in his favor, he signs the 2 cent gas tax. So that is how that works out. With the gas tax, the administrative board got tighter control over the routes where roads were placed. This was not popular across the state because the local officials valued this power that they had and could place roads where they needed to or where they wanted to. This lost him a great deal of support across the state. And he was also, as part of this, driving that Cadillac everywhere. He wanted to be at every site of development of a new road or the improvement of a road. And he didn't step in, but he wanted to observe and supervise. He was said to have been at least part of every road project while he was governor. So that's quite a haul across the state for all those years. One more tidbit about Groesbeck, not necessarily related to all these laws I'm talking about, is that in 1923, he acquired the Carr Ferry Dock at Mackinac, because prior to this, it's privately operated. He brings it into the state's control, because at this point, the line could have backed up for miles and miles and miles, and having the state in control of it brought more money into the state to help pay for roads and help pay for a bridge eventually. Okay, next governor. We're shifting now. So these are governors with sort of ancillary connections to the auto industry. An easy one. Another one that you might have been expecting to hear about tonight is Governor Crapo. Colin told you about Billy Durant. Well, William C. Durant, the C stands for Crapo. His grandfather was Governor Crapo, Henry Howland Crapo, here at the end of the Civil War. Governor Crapo was a lumberman. Billy Durant's career starts with lumber, turns into carriages and wagons, turns into automobiles. So there's that through line with the family lumber industry. Governor Crapo does not live to see the automobile, but it's said that Billy Durant knew his grandfather, at least briefly, and then turns into one of the fathers of the auto industry in General Motors. John Engler, when he's campaigning for governor, when he's the state senator still, is said to have drove around the state in his old Oldsmobile because he wanted to reach the people. He refused to take any state police escorts and helicopters and whatnot. So he drove his Oldsmobile with his campaign team to all corners of the state in 1990 when he was campaigning for governor. Governors who worked in the auto industry. There's two. One is obvious that you're going to know about in a second. The other is Governor Siegler. Governor Siegler worked at the Ford's Highland Park plant when he was in law school in the 1910s. He worked on the line at Highland Park, which was something that I learned about, thought was kind of interesting. The other one who worked in the auto industry is Governor Romney. So Governor Romney was not on the line, but he was the executive behind the scenes. Governor Romney in the 1930s left a lobbying career in California to take up the managerial role of the Automobile Manufacturers Association of Detroit. In 1948, he would more directly enter the auto industry. He joined the Nash Calvinator Corporation and helped lead its merger with the Hudson Motor Car Company in 1954. That merger created American Motors, and he became the president that fall of 1954. He popularized the Rambler and turned the company, which was in $70 million of debt, into profit within 4 years as president of the company. This position as an auto executive lasted for a little less, or through the rest of the decade, I should say, less than a decade, when he was elected to the state constitutional convention in 61 and 62 as a vice president of that, and then he becomes governor. All right, governors with cars in their portraits. So this is sort of a fun little take on this topic. There's two cars in portraits in our building. One is Governor Blanchard. Governor Blanchard's car sitting on his box there, and that is a Chrysler. And the story behind that is that Governor Blanchard served in Congress before he was governor. He was there in the late 70s. He sat on the House Banking Committee, which was powerful, and it issued bailouts to companies across the country. So in 1979, it's revealed that Chrysler is struggling. It's going to go bankrupt, and a $1.5 billion loan guaranteed to save Chrysler is issued. Under Governor Blanchard's watch, it's discovered that he knows about it a little in advance of when it goes public, and then he talks to the whole committee, plans it all out, figures it all out, and it's one of the first private corporations to receive a bailout. So that happens in 1979. It doesn't just save the company, but it saves 80,000 jobs in Michigan as well. He worked through the summer and into the winter, and that bill is signed by President Carter in January 1980. He got the first pen that President Carter used to sign that bill. And I'll point out that in that lower right photo, we see President Carter shaking the hand of Lee Iacocca, who's the head of Chrysler. Between them, sort of behind their hands, is Don Regal, who's one of our U.S. senators from Michigan. And then tucked between Regal and Iacocca is Governor Blanchard, who is then a congressman, sort of back there clapping in the corner. So that was a fun photo that I found as well. The other car in a governor's portrait is Governor Jennifer Granholm. Governor Granholm was just not necessarily related to the car, but she was in office during the 2000s auto bailout and was an advocate for that in 2008-9 when the Obama administration and Congress took that on, providing a $5 billion bailout to GM and Chrysler. But the car in her painting is a Chevy Volt electric car. There's actually a little cord attached to it if you look extra close. And there's a couple nods here. So the car is easy. When the Chevy Volt is debuted in 2010, they bring one of those cars to Lansing, and it is driven by First Gentleman Daniel Mulhern around Capitol Square for like the debut of the car. So that's a fun little connection in there. The shovel in the background is one that we get asked about all the time on Capitol tours. And in 2010, when Governor Granholm was in office, there was a groundbreaking ceremony in Holland, Michigan for the construction of a lithium-ion battery cell manufacturing plant to produce batteries for electric cars. It was attended by President Obama, so that is a representative of that in electric cars and electric batteries for the auto industry. The painting behind her on the wall, the painting within the painting, is the River Rouge plant. It represents Michigan's auto might, sure, but an added layer to that we just learned recently is that the portrait artist of Governor Granholm's painting, Charles Pompilius, actually worked at the River Rouge plant when he was in college, so that's a fun connection as well. And then pictured on the screen, we see her with then Vice President Biden at a 2010 groundbreaking for a Midland Advanced battery plant, and that's what the other groundbreaking photo is there for as well. So that was something that was recurring throughout her time in office. One more, and that's the current office holder, Governor Whitmer. Sort of made a name for herself when she's campaigning with the Fix the Damn Road slogan. And then she has, with the legislative support, passed or signed a couple bills that have made drivers safer. That includes making it illegal to use cell phones with your hands while you're driving, so it has to be hands-free. And then she signed in 2024 a bill authorizing auto speed enforcement in work zones. So there's always that continuous role of new safety laws and all these things that every legislature and every governor work on during their time in office. I just want to conclude here. We'll take any questions, of course, but I just want to conclude by saying that all these governors that we've talked about, all these laws we've talked about, that auto heritage in Lansing and across the state, it all comes back to the Capitol. And this is the crossroads of the state. People drive their cars here all the time, right? But this is where people look to have safety measures passed and to see governors sign those safety measures, as well as seeing the power of the auto industry reflected in this grand old building, which didn't see automobiles originally, but has stood the test of time and seen every phase of automobile that you can think of. So we're going to take any questions, and then once we're done taking questions, I'm going to plug next month's program. Any questions? Ken?
Yes. Concrete pavement. Sitting on Edge Boulevard in the Crandall area on Michigan Avenue, with the monumental plaque. And that's presumably was part of the pavement, Michigan Avenue. Can you comment on that? Because you said there was an academy paving program.
I don't know. Wait, you said it's in Frandor?
It's on Michigan Avenue in the middle of Boulevard and West Ave in the Frandor area.
I can't say that I've seen that, so I can't speak to it.
Yeah.
It's published in the State Journal. It's in the library's vertical file. And a reader was questioning that at the time. The journal reporter investigated it and could not find an answer to the question of when that was paved.
You said there's a plaque on it? Is there a plaque on it, you said? What does the plaque say? Do we know? Okay. All right. I'm just saying that might have our answer on it. So
We'll have to look into
yeah, we'll check into it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I'd say if it's concrete, it probably came after the big like McAdam Road phase, but yeah, I haven't seen it, so
Yeah, I
I'll have
don't
to
know.
look into it and see. I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
probably talking quiet.
All right. Yeah.
Is there like a reason or like that it came about to even try to drive a car up the Capitol path?
Really just to show off.
Okay.
That was the big thing. We haven't done it.
The what? Yeah. For our folks online, was there a reason for this stunt of driving a car up the steps? Do you want to? Yeah, you got that too.
There we
Okay.
go. The main reason was just to show off and show the capability of the vehicle. Obviously they had to do some slight modification to the backside to kind of be able to get it up the steps. When they did those the kind of reenactments, I guess, the first one, they didn't actually even know about the rear treads. I guess they just didn't have access to that photo that was in the slide originally. So they didn't know about that. They tried to go up and it didn't really work out for them. And that wasn't until later on they found out about that and said, we're going to do that again. So they were able to successfully make it up to the first landing in 1987. They had like champagne and a whole thing that was going on. There was big celebration and stuff. But it was a big deal to reenactment. But back in the day, it was just to show the capability to have a big, like, we can make up the Capitol steps. It's going to be a big whole shindig, basically.
Full demonstration of Capitol steps.
I don't know if that existed in the 80s.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Did you stop and drink champagne?
So for the question was, did they go higher than the first level? For the original one, it's presumed that they made it all the way up to the doors, basically. For the 87 attempt, it only made it up to the first landing. They called it mission success and popped the champagne then. So
Yes.
That was 50 cents and it was less than a lifetime. Did that actually hold, or like every year did they actually have to get?
Like, did the license hold up or did they let it?
last
So, yeah, with those 50-cent lifetime driver's licenses, did they actually end up lasting forever? Say somebody lived 50 years. Was their license still good in 1960 if they got it in 1919?
So there's an amendment passed in 1931 that makes licenses expire. I don't know if that's related to the fact that the licenses were falling apart or not, but I imagine they probably were. The one that I actually had in the slides is from the Henry Ford Museum, and it's Henry Ford's license, and you can see it's already kind of beat up, and that's an early one because I think they were just paper at that point.
Yeah. I-
So yeah, they weren't really around long enough to know if they would have lasted 50 years, I guess, because then they started expiring and having to go
Because
back.
you actually like had to have the physical license. So you couldn't just say, oh, well,
Yeah.
I had one in 1919. I don't know where it is now, but
Yeah,
I
you
was
have to
issued
have
one.
it.
So I would think that the 1931 amendment would have made any surviving 1919 ones expire.
Yeah, I think you then had to
So,
go back.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
What would be the approximate date on that picture? Like it's light bulbs that take you into the Capitol?
Yeah, the M design on the light posts. I have the date. I have the exact date of this photo, and I don't have it in front of me right now. I'd have to close the come up after, and I'll tell you. Because
Like it all the way to the Capitol?
no, so see the light post bases at the bottom. They're on posts like that go up, and then they connect and come across and do an M shape over that front walkway. This is like the first. It's like 1910-ish, I think. But I could tell you the exact date once I close the PowerPoint here. 1907. Thanks, mate. Yeah.
Fascinated by this reflective technology, Sheila. The speed limit signs that were at 55 in the daytime, with headlights flashing red 55. How long do we know how long those lasted and were they effective? And do any remain? Asking for a friend.
Okay.
Repeat the question.
Okay. The question was about the speed limit signs with the reflective technology. So you could see 65 in the day and 55 at night. I did not look super far into how long those lasted, but a little bit after, I have a date here, it ended up going to 55 across the board. So I imagine they probably replaced a lot of them then just because they weren't doing 65 at that point. So I think it probably only would have lasted, let's see, it was 1956 was 65 by day, 55 by night. By 1974, it was 55 across the board. So I'm imagining they probably got rid of those and just put 55 at that point.
And I would say that if any survive, I would say like the Henry Ford would have one.
Yeah,
Or like some of these big auto museums. So
they've got a lot. Or MDOT.
and MDOT has an archive too, so they could just have some of them kicking around too.
Yeah, I found a lot of cool things in the Henry Ford's collections while I was looking for stuff. That's where all the car seat photos came from as well. So if you're interested, you should pop around on their site.
Yes.
Auto-related things in Canada. I mean, obviously, English making a big deal about, oh, I'm driving in an Oldsmobile, I'm the everyman.
Yeah.
Did you come across any of that? I know Murphy was not reelected in part, arguably because of his involvement in strikes.
Yeah, I did not. I didn't super look into that, but yeah. Not offhand that I can
I'll
think of.
say I found one, and there was like one clipping of Governor Green when he was kind of running against for the primary. Grosbeck, there was a lot of drama about the Chelsea cement plant and like Governor Green's plans for road building and how they weren't as good. That's the only one I came across, but I was focusing on roads, not governor.
Yeah, they did
But
what
there
they
was a
like.
clipping.
Somebody said like stupidity was a headline in the
Yeah,
newspaper.
I think I want to say stupidity was in reference to like I think Grosbeck thought that Green's plans for highway building were stupid. I think, don't quote me on that, but I think that's how it came across.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a headline that has that in it. So I'm sure there's probably a lot more of that that I just didn't clip.
Anything else? Yes.
Not related to the cars, but I noticed there was a cornerstone that had two different dates.
Yeah.
on it.
Sure. Yeah, that's the Capitol's cornerstone. It's up in the northeast corner. So 1872 is when construction started. 1870, is it 8 or 9 that's on there? 8 is the construction completion. Yep. Yep, on the northeast corner of the building. So the front, if you're looking at it, it's the front right corner.
The Ariel Flung.
Yeah. What was that? Northeast, yep.
Yep.
Or if, yeah, at the right side, if you're looking at the front of it.
Improving roads for cyclists and the agricultural interests. But very soon it was co-opted by the automobile. And it was at that point that he engaged with Edward Hines to pave that mile on Woodward Avenue. And initially, Earls, he was styled the road commissioner, but the legislature balked at that. So he even volunteered to serve for free. And was essentially fired.
Huh.
But I think part of the politics, and you can reflect on this, is I think Michigan had some bank failures or something. And this really crimped the style of the state in its attempt to build roads. This caused the county road commissions to have increased amount of power. And you commented on something about the road commissions at the county level.
Losing that power, yeah.
This extra power well into the 20th century.
Yeah. Until that administrative board and the gas tax and that state funding and federal funding took away their authority to place the roads and place the directions that they wanted to go. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. Well, here you go. Promote next month. We're going to be at Mount Hope Cemetery next month. So come see us. Another outdoor cemetery tour on July 15th. Bring your bug spray. We'll meet right inside the gate and we'll wander through a couple of the sections there. Talk about fascinating people to do related to our capital. So there's a whole bunch of us presenting that one. Thank you.